Good morning. I am trying to wrap up 2nd Nephi here before my birthday, so I thought I would continue on. Now, I will be looking at today chapter 23 of 2nd Nephi, which is Isaiah 13. If you've noticed, the chapters in the Book of Mormon are exactly 10 chapters different from the Isaiah chapters. And so chapter 13 in Isaiah is chapter 23 in 2nd Nephi. So they're easy to remember because there's just 10 chapters difference between them all. Okay, so we're just 2 chapters from the end of completing the block of Isaiah in 2nd Nephi. Now, remember, Nephi said we can rejoice in what Isaiah said for all people, for all men. And he also said, I will speak of judgments. And so there's some of both again in this chapter. It's fused together. Actually, it's sequential. So the first 5 verses or so is about the assembling of the Lord's armies. And then the destruction of Babylon, which is a type of the destruction that will happen at the second coming, is described in graphic and poetic and dramatic terms, verses 6 through 22. And then we just have one more chapter after that. So anyway, the first 2 lines are prosaic, okay, not poetry, but prosaic. It says, the burden of Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amos did see. Now, burden is a word that's often used in Scripture that refers to oracle or revelation. However, it also implies the idea that, prophets don't delight in speaking of destruction. Nobody delights in gloom and doom. No man of God delights in gloom and doom. But it's a burden to have to declare these things because it leads to God will have to send judgments upon His children, and this is never pleasant. So it's a burden to have this oracle and to have to declare it. It's like Jacob when he says, I don't really want to speak about these things today to you in this mixed company, but I feel a burden I have to. The Lord wants me to say these things. And so the burden is the oracle, and again, it's an oracle of judgment upon Babylon. And here we're speaking of the historical Babylon. Remember, Babylon was the kingdom that prophetically follows the Assyrian Empire. And Babylon, the influence of Babylon extends throughout the known world. And, the city of Babylon is legendary for its grandeur and its beautiful gardens and so forth. And it was the cultural, it was a cultural center of the world, and it spread out across all the nations in that region of the world. And anyway. This is going to fall. Babylon will fall, and that's a type. The nation of the empire of Babylon will fall, and the city of Babylon will fall. And this is a type of the fall of the great and spacious building that we looked at much earlier. So Zion and Babylon are still being discussed in these chapters, and they've been discussed since, very early on in 1st Nephi. Okay, so verse 2 says, lift ye up a banner. A banner, meaning a flag or an ensign. One translation has it as, or other translations have it as ensign. Upon the high mountain, exalt the voice, shake the hand. That means summon the nations, summon the righteous. Okay, shake the hand. Another way to put that is beckon. Beckon them with the hand is another translation. Beckon them, so summon them. That they may go into the gates of the nobles. This is an interesting line. The other translation I'm working from is Gileadi's translation, and it says that they may advance into the precincts of the elite. I think this is suggestive of the prophecies relative before the destruction falls upon Babylon and the world of wickedness is destroyed. And that destruction, by the way, comes out of heaven, and it comes. The Lord and His hosts will come, and they will destroy, and fire will precede them, and fire will consume the wicked of the earth, and the earth itself will be consumed in fire and be sanctified and made a habitation for the righteous. But it says here, go into the gates of the nobles. And if we study the revelations relative to the day of the Lord, which is what it's termed here in the chapter, we learn that the righteous will need to, like Daniel said in the Old Testament, when the desolation of abomination is at hand, the saints or the righteous should stand in holy places. They need to go into the gates of the nobles. Okay, they need to find places where they can go in and sequester, because God is going to send his wrath suddenly upon the earth, and it's going to destroy the nations of the earth and the wicked, primarily the proud and those that have been lifted up and who do wickedly, like Malachi said. So go into the gates of the nobles. Now that the hymn 7 in our hymn book is about this very doctrine, the idea that when the desolation is sent, when there is abomination. So when the earth is ripe in iniquity, the nations are ripe in iniquity, God will send desolation upon them. But the righteous will be gathered into holy places. And so hymn 7 is Israel, Israel, God is calling thee from lands of woe. And remember the chorus there is, the righteous will be within the walls of Zion when the wrath of God is punishing the nations of the earth. That will take place, and it will take place according to the flesh. And hymn 7 is the doctrine. It's also being apparently taught here by Isaiah. In fact, Isaiah probably, in some sense, is the originator of that particular concept, although it's found in modern Revelation as well, section 45 and Matthew 24, JST, and so forth. Okay, verse 3, I have commanded my sanctified ones. I also have called my mighty ones, in other words, the righteous from the earth, and I'm gathering them to the stakes of Zion. For my anger is not upon them that rejoice in my highness. Okay, God speaking there through the prophet. The noise of the multitude, then, the righteous gathered to the mountains, are like a great people, a tumultuous noise of the kingdoms of nations gathered together in one. The Lord of hosts is mustering the hosts of his armies. He's mustering the armies of God are being mustered. And remember, God of battles, Lord of hosts is Jesus Christ. And he comes again. And it says in verse 5, he's going to bring the hosts of heaven with him. He says, they come from far countries, even from the end of heaven will they come. And the Lord and the weapons of his indignation. Remember, the angels will come with the Lord, and the saints the righteous will be raised out of the graves and come in the air with him. And of course, the living righteous will be again assembled in some fashion, apparently. And anyway, the Lord's armies will be assembled out of heaven and from the nations of the earth into these places, and they'll be gathered. And then destruction will fall upon the world, and it will happen in a day. In other words, it says here it's going to be in other passages it says in one day. It will happen suddenly. We learn, the suddenly idea, the idea of suddenness rather is in verse 22. But anyway, verse 6 says, how ye, this is the transition in the chapter, how ye, for the day of the Lord is at hand. It shall come as a destruction from the Almighty. Okay, so now the saints are assembled, and the Lord is coming with the instruments of his indignation. And by the way, this is all prophetic, because Isaiah is speaking of the destruction of Babylon a full century and more before it happens historically to Babylon, before Babylon is overcome by the Medes. See, verse 17 says the Persians destroy Babylon and the kingdom of Babylon. And of course, Babylon declines over time and eventually becomes just a desolation. And so the final images of the chapter about how desolate Babylon has become by the early, the centuries around the time of the Arab and Muslim habitation or nations when they come to power. Anyway, verse 7, there shall all hands be faint, every man's heart shall melt. Notice the shall, these are all future tense verbs. And they shall be afraid, pangs and sorrows shall take hold of them. They shall be amazed one at another, and their faces will be as flames. either flames with fear or flames with shame and a shame. It's just amazing. It's amazingly graphic. Behold, verse 9, the day of the Lord cometh, cruel, both with wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate, and he shall destroy the sinners thereof out of it. For the stars of heaven. Okay, now this is interesting. So we have the signs of the times. Some of the final signs that are mentioned are stars of heaven, and the constellations thereof will not give their light. In other words, the earth will be, from the perspective of man, will be darkened, and the sun shall be darkened in his going forth. So there'll be some kind of smoke or some kind of blocking of the sunlight and the starlight. Okay. And the moon shall not cause her light to shine either. Verse 11, and I will punish the world for evil. This is pretty plain language. It's hard to misunderstand him. I'm going to punish the wicked. And the wicked, punish the world for evil and the wicked for iniquity. I will cause the arrogancy of the proud to cease, and will lay down the proud or the haughty and the terrible, those that are cruel and vicious. And I will make a man more precious in that day than the golden wedge of Ophir. Ophir is a place, and men will be scarce. And again, remember we looked about earlier when we talked about the Babylonian, the historic Babylonian destruction of Israel, or yes, Jerusalem and the inhabitants in the region. We talked about how men would be scarce, okay? And here again, we get the same image. Men would be scarce as gold, okay? So men will be rare. Mankind will be rare. In fact, many will be consumed in the fires. It'll be a day of judgment. And all who are keeping a telestial law, all of those who are wicked and are proud and do wickedly, and so forth, will be consumed with the judgments and be destroyed. So righteous men will be, and he means mankind generally, I think here, will be fewer in number, and rare. Righteous people will be rare. In verse 13, or they'll be fewer in number. Again, how many will remain and abide the day is unclear to me, but it won't be. It will be comparatively few, right? Okay, verse 14, and it shall be as the chaste roe. Now, this is interesting to me because it sounds here in the King James Version, or the King James language of the Book of Mormon, as if the earth will be like a chaste roe. Okay, now, the earth will be moved out of her place, okay, and it will cause, let's see, how does it say it? The earth shall remove out of her place, that's verse 13, and I will shake the heavens. So we know that the earth will be moved, and that it will seem like the stars are shaking, and but it's the earth itself that's moving and or being kind of convulsed. Okay. Now in verse 14, this translation or this reading in the Book of Mormon, it sounds as if the earth itself will be considered like a chaste roe, which is a deer. Okay. And as a sheep that no man taketh up, that the earth itself, because of its movement, will be like a chaste deer, or a sheep that no man collecteth or taketh up. But I like Gileadi's translation of this. It's a little bit more, I think, more correct, I think. And what he compares this to, let me see if I can find the right verses here. I will cause disturbance in the heavens when the earth is jolted out of place by the anger of the Lord of hosts in the day of his blazing wrath. Then, it says, like a deer that is chased, or a flock of sheep that no one rounds up, each person will return to his own people, and everyone flee to his homeland. So, the chaste roe and the sheep that's no one rounds up has to do with the people that are fleeing. They're returning to their nations, much like they have during the pandemic. We've had a pandemic, and many people have returned to their homelands to be with their families, and to sit through the quarantines and sit through to pass through the pandemic together. In a similar way, this will be more dramatic, but the people will flee or travel to their homelands, and like sheep, they'll be in a panic to some degree, and like sheep that no one rounds up, or like a chased deer, they're going to be scattering to their homelands and gathering with their peoples because of the destruction that's coming upon the earth. And it's imminent, and they sense that, okay? And so, but the earth will be removed out of her place, and there will be a great earthquake, and there will be this kind of thing that will seemingly shake the heavens. The heavens will be fixed, but the earth, when it moves, it will appear that the stars themselves are falling and or being shifted and shaken around. That's how I understand the imagery there. Verse 15, everyone that is proud shall be thrust through with the sword. Yea, and everyone, I'm in verse 15, and everyone that is joined to the wicked. In other words, you want to separate from the wicked, right? You want to go into the gates of the nobles. Everyone who's among the wicked will be in jeopardy of being overcome with the judgments of God. And so, everyone that is proud shall be thrust through. Everyone that is joined to the wicked shall fall in the battle. Their children even will be, their women and their children will be dashed to pieces before their eyes. Their houses shall be spoiled, and their wives will be ravished. It's not pretty. This is the imagery of war and of sacking and of pillaging and of raping, and it's just horrendous imagery here. The thing is, this is what takes place when armies like the Persian or the Medes come in to take Babylon and overcome the empire of Babylon. This is the kind of thing that takes place during war. It's an ugly, satanic business. War is a satanic business. But again, this is descriptive of the judgments. And again, the destruction is not partial to children or women or to the weak and the vulnerable. All will be, if they've been among the wicked, they will be dealt with in this same kind of way. Now, the Lord, of course, that's why he's sending the prophets to help gather the people, gather the nations, gather the righteous, gather the good from out of the different places and take them to a place of safety, because he doesn't want the people to suffer these things, but as a natural consequence of wickedness, these things will fall upon the earth, and all who are not gathered to the righteous and gathered to the good and in the proper places and assembled and following their leaders and so forth, they are in jeopardy of experiencing some of this, if not the full brunt of it, depending on who they are and what the Lord intends with them. Anyway, verse 17, I will stir up the Medes, meaning the Persians, and they will come against Babylon. And they'll not regard your silver and your gold, nor shall they delight in it. Their bows also shall dash the young men to pieces, and they shall have no pity on the fruit of the womb. So even pregnant women will be affected by the invading armies. Their eyes shall not spare children, even children. There's no mercy here, okay? And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, that great empire, and the beautiful city, Babylon. Notice, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees' excellency, shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah with fire and brimstone out of heaven. They will be consumed by fire and become a desolation. And the last three or four verses are just really graphic. I'm going to read Gileadi's translation. Basically, Babylon is destroyed, and so destroyed that it never will be inhabitable again. And the animals of the desert will inhabit the old ruins, and no one will pitch tent there, because it will be so desolate, and it will remain desolate forever and ever. Babylon will not have any more inhabitants. Okay, that's the prophecy in the last three verses there. Let me see if I can just read this other translation. I think it's kind of interesting. It's and they end differently. These two end differently. One ends, our Book of Mormon ends with, for I will be merciful unto my people. In other words, I'll gather them to these safe locations. I will be merciful to my people, but the wicked shall perish. And that's probably a better ending, I think, in the Book of Mormon than this translation. But I will pick it up here in verse 20, if I can see my text here. Verse 20. It says, never shall it, Babylon, be re-inhabited. It shall not be resettled through all generations. Nomads will not pitch tent there, nor will shepherds rest their flocks in it, but wild animals will infest it, and its buildings or its ruins overflow with weasels. Birds of prey will find lodging there, and demonic creatures prance about in it. Jackals will cry out from its palaces or its ruins. Howling creatures from the amusement halls. So where there were parties and amusements and entertainments, and the wicked were cohorting and partying and rioting and carrying on, howling creatures will inhabit amusement halls. Her time draws near, meaning Babylon is going to be destroyed, and her time is very limited. Babylon's days shall not be prolonged. Okay, and again, that's the ending here in Gilead, but I like the ending, for I will be merciful unto my people, but the wicked shall perish. Now, the Book of Mormon ending leads well into the next chapter, which is the last chapter of the block of Isaiah, and it's Isaiah 14, which is really interesting and very cool, and we'll look at it in our next video, or in the next video. Sharing this second translation, oftentimes if you compare translations, it's a lot of fun, and you can kind of learn things about the nuances between. So it's not a commentary, it's a translation. It's another translation, and some are, more modernized translations, and some are, better than others. But the Book of Mormon, the language here seems to be pretty much represented by the King James language, that it must have been either on the brass plates or just what was given to Joseph in the translation process. We don't quite understand fully the nature of the translation process, but it appears to be, taken from the brass plates and resemble King James English, okay? Now, these other translations just provide just a little bit more kind of variation on words and the precision of the words. Like instead of the Arabian in the Book of Mormon, it says the nomad in this translation. So the nomad, the Arabian, I like both. I like knowing about both words. That helps me kind of flesh out the overall picture. So I recommend, translation comparisons and those types of things if you have time in your personal study. But hopefully that was useful to you. I think, again, we can have great hope, but we need to gather with the righteous, and we need to be prepared to stand in holy places when the desolation because of abomination begins to come upon the earth in that day. Again, it's going to be a great and terrible day. Great for some, terrible for many, unless they repent and come into the covenant and or join with the righteous. And again, the telestial will be in the way of judgment, and it will be a fierce and a terrible day for them. And so these things we have to understand. These are in the prophecies. This is going to happen, okay, in the flesh, according to the flesh. Thank you.